We have been talking about all sorts of parables over the past, 2 months. And over the past couple of weeks, we have been in Matthew chapter 25, where 2 weeks ago we looked at what it means to be prepared for the return of Jesus. And then last week we talked about what it means to be faithful in the meantime as Jesus returns. We talked about the parable of the 10 virgins a couple weeks ago, and last week we talked about the parable of the talents. If you missed any of those, you can go to our YouTube channel and check out what we've talked about over the past couple weeks. But essentially, we've been looking at all of these stories that Jesus tells about. They're usually just these small, short, fictional stories that Jesus tells, but they are, as we've been saying week after week, parable is an earthly story that has a heavenly meaning. Parables are earthly stories that have heavenly meanings. And we've been diving into different ones each and every week. This one, we're going to take a look into what's probably Jesus' most famous parable. There's a couple of things before we get too far. One, if you are a note taker, we have notes on the back 2 tables alongside those lead team sheets if you are up for that. And si eres un hablador de español, hay mis notas en español en la mesa allí. So if Spanish is your main language, we have notes in Spanish, and you can pick one of those up so you can follow my message. But I want to start off with, what's the most famous painting in the world? What would you guys think? Mona Lisa, right? Mona Lisa. We can throw it on the screen. There she is in all her beauty. No matter where you are in the room, she's staring at you. But
she looks like Jesus.
No. What?
I don't think so.
What?
No. We'll leave it at that. But I bet maybe there's one or two of you, but almost none of us probably know why this painting is so famous. But it comes from, because here's the thing is, Mona wasn't always famous. It's like when she was painted until actually 1911, so just about 100 years ago, Mona Lisa was known by like those just fancy art critics, but really wasn't known by the general public. But on August 21st, 1911, something crazy happened. And it was stolen off the wall in the Louvre. So nowadays, if you go to the Louvre, it's kind of got its own separate display and place where it's got these security guards all surrounding it. Back then, it was just another painting on the wall. So if you're walking through the Cincinnati Gallery, it's just one of those random paintings that's on the wall. Most people just breeze past it. And how actually I can prove to you that it wasn't a significant painting is it took the gallery 26 hours to realize that the painting was missing. It was stolen on Monday morning. And it wasn't until a little while on Tuesday when somebody, for an art class, came in to actually study the Mona Lisa, that they realized, oh shoot, this painting isn't on the wall anymore. It has been stolen. And that started a media frenzy when people heard that this random painting was stolen. And so people flooded in to see this empty space where the Mona Lisa used to sit. I don't know why you'd go in to see an empty space, but they did. So they went in, people would go, and they saw this empty space, and it took them 2 years to find the painting. When it finally resurfaced, and this guy was trying to sell it on the black market, and they finally were able to find the Mona Lisa, bring it back into the main space, and at that point, the popularity just exploded for the Mona Lisa. And this lost painting became even more treasured when it was found. And why I start there is because sometimes what's most important can get overlooked until we realize how much it actually matters. And when that thing is eventually found, what we do is, like the Mona Lisa, we celebrate like never before. And that's the emotion and the joy of the story that Jesus tells, and what might be the most famous story, maybe even potentially in the whole Bible, at least out of the stories that Jesus tells, the story of, it's commonly called the prodigal son. It's the most famous story that Jesus tells, but it's actually linked to a couple other ones, and we'll get into that in just a second. So, if you have your Bible, we are in Luke chapter 15. We're actually going to read the entire chapter as we go over the course of this morning. So if you have your Bible, it's in the New Testament. If you look at your table of contents, it's Matthew, Mark, and then Luke is the third book in the New Testament, one of these biographies of Jesus. And this is in a section of some stories of parables that the biographer Luke is getting into from the stories of Jesus. And so In chapter 15, verse 1, if you turn there, again, if you don't know where it is, you can have a neighbor help you get there. But in Luke 15, here, verse 1 kind of gives us the background of what's about to happen. It says this, it says, "Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they muttered, 'Well, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" And so, that's the story, or that's kind of the context that is being set up in here. And so the question is like, why would Jesus welcome these sinners and tax collectors? Is what they're asking them. And so these sinners, that's kind of a derogatory term in that day and age. Of like, these are the people who they're cheaters, they're swindlers, they're not the good church folks, right? But yet Jesus, who's professing to be this teacher, is he's hanging out with these people anyways. And yet, Jesus attracted these types of people to him. And it even makes me kind of pause for a second. And as someone who follows Jesus, like, do Christians do this today? Are we attractive to people who aren't following Jesus? Because Jesus was. So are we that way as well? And then it says this in verse 3. It says, "Then Jesus told them this parable." And I pause there for a second because if you don't read this closely, you might think there's going to be 3 parables in a row that it seems like Jesus tells, but yet it says that Jesus tells them this parable. So, like, there's a connection between all 3 of these stories that Jesus is about to tell. There's actually one parable told in 3 different ways. And so, here we go in the first one. It says, "Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you had 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and he goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' And I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." Okay, first story, lost sheep. Second one he tells is the story, this parable of the lost coin. It says this, "Or suppose a woman had 10 silver coins and she loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls together her friends and neighbors and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin.' And in the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." So these are 2 very similar stories, right? There's something valuable that's lost. There's a dedicated search for it. And then at the very end, once this thing is found, there's this huge party and celebration and joy that's found in this. So then we get to the third story. That's the parable of the prodigal son, or the lost son. And I'm going to kind of read it, and then we're going to kind of look at what all 3 of these parables have to say. It says that Jesus continued, "And there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger one said to his father, 'Well, Father, give me my share of the estate.' So essentially it says, like, 'Dad, you're dead to me. Like, I think that you're dead. So just give me my inheritance now. And I'm going to go off and I'm going to just act like you don't exist.' And this dude, he's probably in his late teens. He's not married yet. And so that's kind of the setting. So think about, like, probably junior or senior in high school is probably the kind of person that we're imagining in this story. That's the son's age. It says, "Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had. He set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living." It says that after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. And so he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his field to feed pigs, which in that day would have been the most unclean of all animals. They weren't even supposed to associate or touch pigs, but yet that's where he went to the lowest of the low. And he said that he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Even these dirty, unclean animals were better off. Then it says, when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him," he's going to rehearse this speech in his mind, right? "And Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So he sets off on his path back to his father's house. He's probably, like, if you ever, like, have a hard conversation, like, I'm imagining he's, like, replaying the story in his head time and time again. He's got to get all the words right. He's thinking about what his dad's going to say back. But It says this, while he was a long ways off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And this was probably one of the more shocking things in the story, because a respectable, elder of the city does not run anywhere. They are too dignified to do that, so they walk where they go. And so for a father to run to his son is actually a crazy thing in this culture. And so the son starts to give his speech. It says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But his father cuts him off in the middle of his speech and says to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And so they began to celebrate. The story, it ends here with a complete restoration to sonship, and we feel like this is the end of the story, but then there is, almost feels like this coda, this extra thing that happens in this third story, and it says, "Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Well, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed the fatted calf for him.'" He doesn't even recognize that it's his brother. He's like, "This son of yours." And then the father responds, "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So we have these three different stories, all kind of telling the same thing. Actually, just to kind of preface, there's a great book by Tim Keller called The Prodigal God, and some of his content comes from him, but because he has a great way that he kind of shapes what the story is actually about. But again, these stories are pretty simple. On the front, right, you have something that's the key words, and here you have something that's lost, and there's something that's found, and then there's a celebration that happens, right? And so the question that Jesus is proposing to the Pharisees is, well, if something is lost, well, how much should you celebrate when it returns? Because here's our first point today. It's that lostness comes in different forms. That lostness comes in different forms. So we almost have these four different people who are lost in different ways. You have in the first story, you have the sheep that's lost just because of its foolishness. It's kind of, nothing bad happens, right? But the sheep just kind of wanders off. It's kind of made one decision after another, and this lost thing has wandered off. Just like for some people, that's how we were lost. It's not that one really bad thing happened, but it was just a small decision, and then another small decision, and suddenly you're nowhere near the rest of the pack, and you're completely lost in just foolishness. And some of us were lost like the coin, where it's just circumstances. Maybe you surrounded yourself with a bad friend group or whatever it might be, but like the coin, the circumstances just caused this thing to be lost. For others of us, it's like the younger brother in this story, and maybe it's rebellion, where it's really obvious type of a thing. This is when we think about a sinner, this is a person that the Pharisees would have really been thinking about. That, oh yeah, this person's super self-centered, they're morally broken, everything that you would think about this person like that, oh yeah, that's a bad guy, right? But then Jesus kind of throws us for a loop, and he's like, yeah, those are three different ways that you can be lost, but actually another way that we can be lost is simply in our pride, which is what the older brother was doing. And this person is just as lost as the other three are. And yet, even though he was raised around the Father, you can kind of hear it in his voice when he responds to the Father, that he didn't actually love the Father for who he was, but he actually just used obedience to actually control God. He was like, if I do all the right things, then the Father is going to reward me in such a way. And for some of us, we're kind of like this son as well, where it's like, well, God, if I just do all the right things, if I just read my Bible enough, if I just I don't say any cuss words, if I date the right person, if I do all of these things, then God, you are going to reward me and give me the things that I want. And that's actually just as lost as these other people are. Tim Keller says it in this way. He says that you can rebel against God and be alienated from him either by breaking his rules or by keeping all of them diligently. That there are two different ways that we can rebel against God. Is that we can either just be completely lost and run away purposely from him, or we can be surrounded by all of the right things and still not know God. Because if you don't understand, like the point of the story is it's all about the grace of the Father. That the Father is the one who actually comes and he pursues his lost son and comes after him. And if you don't understand that point of grace, you actually won't understand the Father at all. Because, and we say this over and over, but because we need this reminder over and over. But the whole point of the gospel is not about making bad people good. It's about making dead people alive. Because for so many of us, like for people who are lost, and all of us, no matter who we are or where we are, we have been lost at one point. You have seen that the end result of being lost is not fulfilling. That wild night ends and the hangover begins. You put all of your worth in pursuing another person, and yet they still let you down. Or the rule following still ends by getting passed over. You've like done all the things that coaches asked you to do, and someone else still gets the starting spot. You're like, that's not fair. And that's the whole point of the gospel, is it's not fair. Is that God actually gives you something that you don't deserve. And here's the thing, is anything other than Jesus will not lead to a fulfilling life. So lostness comes in different forms, but the good news of the gospel, of this story, that this good news that God is giving us, is that God delights in saving people. That God actually delights in saving people. Because it's one thing for the Father to just accept the Son, or the coin to be found, or the sheep to come back into the fold, but not, like God takes, like Jesus takes us to a whole nother level. It's not just that, oh, this thing is found, it's, hey, this lost thing is found, so we're going to celebrate because this thing is found. And it's actually the bad news that makes the good news great news. Is that for us, we have to recognize first that we were lost apart from Jesus, and that there's no way for any of us to make it back to God on our own. But the fact is that God decided he didn't want to leave us in our mistakes, in our misery. And so what he did is he sent Jesus to be a perfect sacrifice on our behalf. Because if we trust in Jesus, we have an even more fulfilling life than we ever could have imagined. And why does God choose to do it? And here's the beautiful thing, is God doesn't save us just because he has to. God saves us because he's great. And that's in his character, in his nature. He saves it for him, actually. That God saves us for his glory and for his own delight. And it says that the angel in all of heaven rejoices when a lost person comes to know Jesus. But you know what often happens? Is that there's this party that happens in heaven, and everyone is celebrating when a lost person comes to know Jesus. But oftentimes what happens is religious people start to murmur. Isn't they start to go, well, like, did you see what that guy did last week? Like, I don't know if they're actually really saved. And they go onto Reddit or Twitter, X, whatever it's called, and they start to wonder, like, is that person really saved? Like, did you hear those words that they were using the other day? There's no way they could be following Jesus anymore. And for so many times, like, there's this celebration that happens in heaven, but people who are supposed to be the ones who are celebrating with the angels don't. Like, have you ever been miserable at a party before? Like, I know for me, I can think back to a time when I was working at camp, and there was this, like, we were preparing for our summer camp, and so we were filming all of these videos, and I was kind of the person who was filming all of it and putting it together, and I was having a great time doing that. And we had, the last one was this color war that we were supposed to do, and we're supposed to, like, have a lot of fun doing it, but I found out that I got to do all these other videos, but somebody else was going to make that video. And so we had this, what was supposed to be this really fun moment. And I was just a party pooper in the back because I thought, man, I should be doing this. I make all the other ones. Like, why won't they let me do this one? And I had a miserable time just thinking that it's not fair in the corner while everybody else was having a blast. And for so many of us, that's how we see people who are far from God. But what Jesus wants is Jesus wants you to join the party. And like when I say heaven, like I don't want us to think about like harps and clouds and wings, because that's like when I see Precious Moments dolls in the store, like I just want to punch them, because that's not what heaven is like at all. Like heaven is this, like the pictures that we see in the Bible of heaven is it's a feast, it's a celebration, it's dancing, it's partying. And what Jesus is trying to warn the Pharisees about in this moment is don't be left outside. Like either doing your own thing or lamenting like, God, why did you let that other person in? That's not what he wants from us. Because he delights in saving all people, no matter how far from God you feel like you are right now. He is coming after you, he is pursuing you, and he wants a relationship with you. You're not supposed to clean yourself up to come to him. He comes to you, and then as you walk in that faith, you start to get cleaned up because he has already called you by name. That God delights in saving all people from all walks of life, and he wants to have a relationship with you. And the last thing is that forgiveness comes at a cost. That el perdón tiene un precio. Forgiveness comes at a cost. Because here's the thing that I think that's what, as I read that Tim Keller book, that he really helped me understand. But actually, the main character in here is not the lost son. It's not the older brother, but the main character in the story is the father. And he, if you look at the character of the father in this story, he is incredibly gracious. He gives generously. And you might call, anybody looking on the outside might call it reckless. That why would you throw a party for someone who lost half of your money? Like, he lost half of your fields, he lost all this stuff, and yet you went and sacrificed, like, your, like, prized animal. When you live in this society, like, you don't just do this for fun, because that's food for the next several weeks. And yet he went and he threw this huge party for his lost son, because the son doesn't deserve anything, and yet the father goes above and beyond. That he runs to him before the son even is able to give his whole story of why he's returning. The father runs to him and calls him beloved. And I want us to notice the order in that, because I think we get this backwards. Is that grace precedes the repentance. Is that the father runs to him and says, I love you, before the son even has a chance to say, I'm sorry. Because that's who the father actually is. Because forgiveness comes at a cost, and he gives so much, more than he even needs to, for us. And the interesting thing, as I was kind of reading the story over and over again, is that, you know who's supposed to go after the lost son? Actually, the responsibility for finding this lost son actually goes to the older brother. So he's supposed to be the one who's kind of looking out for him. He's supposed to be the one who's has this watch out for his younger brother, and yet he's kind of slaving away, doing his thing over here on the side, not actually fulfilling his responsibility. But yet, the whole point of the gospel and the point of Jesus is actually the older brother that we need. And Jesus went to go bring us home at the cost of his own life. And that's why I love this story so much, is because it just reminds me of just the simplicity of what the gospel is. Is that it's this whole concept of that you can't make this life on your own. You can't do it. But yet, God came to you in your brokenness, ran to you, did what other people might call crazy, because he loves you, he's for you, and he wants a relationship with you. And no matter what kind of lostness you have in your life, that he is looking out for you, and he wants to celebrate you coming into his family. And so if you don't know him, today's your day. Today's the day of salvation. Would you put your trust in Jesus? Because he wants to have a relationship with you. That it's okay to not be okay. And what Jesus is going to do is he's going to bring you along in that relationship. And for those of us who do know Jesus, my question to you is, who is your one more? Who is that person that you are reaching out to? And this is something that we've talked about multiple different times throughout the year, but my hope is that each of us have somebody that's on our hearts. Maybe it's a family member who doesn't know Jesus. Maybe it's a really good friend at school who doesn't know Jesus. Maybe it's that person who sits beside me in that class. Maybe it's that person next to me in marching band. I don't know who it is for you, but who is your one more? Who is that person who your heart breaks for because they don't know Jesus? And my hope is that as we kind of process this idea of your one more, is that you would begin to start to realize what the story actually means. That Jesus has actually died for you in your place, and he has died for them in their place, and he wants a relationship with them too. And then maybe in the next week, next couple of weeks, you'd be willing to go have a conversation with them and have a spiritual conversation with them. And maybe in a couple of weeks, you invite them to Launch Sunday. I think that'd be awesome. That's a great way to do it. Or whatever that looks like. In the next little season, we'll start to talk about this thing called Alpha that we're doing. I'll just give you, actually right now I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview to what that is. But in kind of the months of, I guess we're going to start this at the end of September, but it's an 8-week journey to help people who don't know God come to know God. And if you do already know God, it helps you strengthen your faith by kind of going back to some of these basic questions. And the hope is that if there's somebody who doesn't know Jesus, whether they're really far from God or they're spiritually seeking whatever that on that spectrum they might be, that this is going to be a place where they're welcome to come in, where you're welcome to come in and have these spiritual conversations in a safe place. There's not going to be anything weird that happens, but it's going to open some honest dialogue. And my hope is that that's going to be an insane time for us to be able to have real conversations about the gospel and about who Jesus is. And so, in just a second, we're going to end with some worship. But before we get to that, I want us to circle up in groups of 3 or 4. And I think they'll play a little bit in the background. But just a couple minutes of praying for your one more. If it's somebody that's sitting right beside you, great, that's awesome. I'm glad that they're here. You might not want to say their name out loud because that's kind of embarrassing to them. I don't know. But I would encourage you, pray for them by name. Circle up with a group of 2 or 3 and pray for that person. That ask God to give you the boldness to reach out to them. That they would be open to a spiritual conversation. And that God would do the things that he does best, which is save people. And so we're going to pray, give us a couple minutes, and then when the band is ready, they'll jump into our last song. So, Jesus, we love you. We thank you for this incredible story. That out of all of the many stories that you told, the one that's most known is the one that tells the story of your heart the most clearly. God, thank you that you're a God who rescued me when I was far off from you. That I was the older brother who thought that I knew better. And yet you came and you showed me that actually being proud is not biblical. But for each of us, you came and you died for us where we were while we were still sinners. And you have called all of us to follow in your way. So God, will you just be with us? Would you help us to be bold in praying and bringing in our one mores and to follow you even more strongly? So God, we love you. It's in your name we pray.